Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we discuss the Tyranids, as we debate just which Hive Fleet could be the next big threat to arise. No need for a spoiler warning today, so we are just going to jump straight in. Now, as we know right now, the Tyranids are taking a little bit of a backseat in the grand scheme of things, compared to the likes of Chaos and the Necrons over the past few years. Since the devastation of Baal, we've really seen the ruinous powers rise to prominence, truly becoming that arch-enemy and ultimate threat to the Imperium they are supposed to be. Since the fall of Cadia, the entire galaxy is at the mercy of Chaos. And for the Necrons, they've had the return of the Silent King himself. Long left to just be a mystery, we have now seen him return from the void, determined to bring his people back to the dominant force they once were. From an outside the lore perspective, obviously we understand every faction needs their time to shine, and Chaos and the Necrons did very much deserve their TLC. However, with no sign of the next major Hive Fleet emerging from the void, I have started to wonder, could we instead see one of the many minor Hive Fleets, the ones we already know, begin to rise to prominence? And well, today we're going to take a look and discuss the likely candidates. Now, the minor Hive Fleets don't tend to get much of a look within the larger narrative, more just giving us some pretty cool rules and nice colour schemes for the tabletop. However, when it comes to the Tyranids, there's really no such thing as a minor threat. Each and every Hive Fleet is a truly deadly proposition for the worlds that lie in their path. The major Hive Fleets have simply represented a galaxy-ending threat. While the others may have yet to realise that potential, there's nothing saying they won't. Now, we know fleets Behemoth, Kraken and Leviathan have been largely blunted and stopped. However, it would be a grave error to believe them eradicated. A single enclave of Tyranids is more than capable of growing in threat if left unchecked. Dante, for example, is still extremely concerned with the remnants of Leviathan. So while we're going to be focusing on the lesser known fleets today, there's nothing saying Behemoth, Kraken or Leviathan won't return with a vengeance. So, let's begin with Hive Fleet Hydra. Now, for me, Hydra is perhaps the most interesting of all the lesser known fleets. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no map included in the current codex detailing where the fleets currently are, unless I missed it on my read-through. So I don't want to focus on their locations too much, as it could well be out of date or changed in an event or campaign. For Hydra, it used to be emerging pretty much dead center to the galactic south. However, we're given a real intriguing description for me regarding Hydra that kind of sets it apart. And that is that it's actually following in the wake of previous larger Hive Fleets. Whereas for Tyranids you expect them to be focusing on fresh new feeding grounds, Hydra is actually following routes that have already been scoured. And so this is actually giving Hydra 3 unique benefits. Firstly, because it's following paths of worlds largely already ravaged, or at least weakened by previous Hive Fleets, Hydra is actually making extremely fast progress compared to other Tyranid incursions, advancing very deep into Imperium territory. Secondly, because it's met less resistance, It's obviously had to expend less of its biomass to eradicate the enemy. So we're told it has a huge amount of biomass in reserve. When the time comes for it to expend it, it can do so with terrifying speed and power. And lastly, because Hydra followed previous fleets, it's been able to harvest the remnants of their dead, meaning it's been able to learn from their experiences and defeats. Whereas some Hive fleets have to face a threat and adapt in reaction, Hydra is adapting in advance. It has learnt from battles it hasn't had to experience. It knows what the defenders it encounters will do before they've even had a chance to do it. For me, this makes Hive Fleet Hydra a terrifying prospect for the Imperium to face. It's almost gliding by unnoticed on the wider galactic scale, keeping to the shadows of the dead. It's very possible to say that by the time it truly has to unleash its potential, by the time the Imperium begins to realise this threat already amongst them, it could well be too late. And so Hive Fleet Hydra absolutely has to be amongst the top contenders for me. Next we'll move on to Hive Fleet Gorgon. Now Gorgon's also a bit of an unknown factor, in the sense that the Imperium doesn't actually know how long it's been within the galaxy. Their best estimates are that it could well have been fighting the Tau Empire for centuries already. Knowing that it's the Tau Empire who have faced the brunt of this Hive fleet, we can be fairly certain it remains over on the eastern fringe, and it's said to be noted for its surprisingly swift adaptability, able to adapt seemingly within moments in battle. Now, having faced off mostly against the Tau, I almost would have expected Gorgon to favour their own form of heavy-hitting gun-based adaptations. However, it's actually renowned for its toxic bio-warfare. With its ability to adapt so swiftly, this means that any enemy Gorgon faces will within a matter of minutes be facing not only the heartless massive teeth and claws, but a toxin adapted uniquely to their own genetic makeup. This makes Hive Fleet Gorgon an even more heart-dreading prospect than ever. Entire populations would be falling in swathes. And while you might not be entirely sure how much advantage that may give them against, say, the Space Marines for example, who for the most part can survive within poisonous toxic atmospheres, it is worryingly said that the toxic adaptations of Gorgon was enough to take out the Plague Marines of the Death Guard. Let me state that again. The toxins of Gorgon were too much for even the Death Guard to endure. Poisoning the Chosen of Nurgle, now that is saying something. These may be the two most lethal Hive fleets right off the bat. Next we have Hive Fleet Kronos. Hive Fleet Kronos may well be the Hive Mind's answer to the psychic awakening that swept the galaxy. It is adapted to have a shadow in the warp vastly more powerful than any other yet seen. For those of you that may not know, the shadow in the warp is exactly that. A vast psychic shadow that is projected through the warp surrounding the Tyranid Hive fleet, overwhelming and smothering any and all psychic connection, filling those who fall within it with an innate sense of doom. Any psyker attempting to use their powers within its grasp is quite simply risking madness or death. And so for Kronos, this effect is even more pronounced. It's actually been reported that warp rifts are force closed as Kronos approaches. That's the minions of the ruinous powers fade back into the immaterium. Kronos appears to be uniquely placed to take on the flood of chaos that is marching across the galaxy. Even reported trailing worlds along the edge of the cicatrix maledictum. And while most definitely not an ally to any of the living species, it's hard to say it is not more adapted to taking on the ruinous powers. Where that could take it in the future remains to be seen, and it could well turn out to be the larger threat of any Hive fleet. However, for me, in its focus against the Psychic, I don't see it quite the threat at the moment as Gorgon or Hydra. However, as always, that is just my opinion. If you disagree, make sure to drop it in the comments below. Next we move on to Hive Fleet Jormungandr. Now obviously I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. However, this Hive Fleet was previously known to be emerging from the galactic east. And upon first viewing, it doesn't appear to have quite the formidable reputation as some others. Hive Fleet Jormungandr favours ambush. We're told that rather than launch a standard all-out assault as other Hive Fleets tend to do, Jormungandr actually attempts to infect a world from distance before risking the bulk of its bio ships, sending forth its broods and creatures uniquely adapted to burrowing beneath the surface. So even once the Tyranids make planetfall, no assault is necessarily immediately obvious, as the creatures burrow to safety below the ground, harvesting sustenance and building their strength for the inevitable assault. Now, if somehow the full force of the Hive Fleet approaching is unknown, this is most likely an incredibly successful tactic, at least against the majority of Imperial worlds, particularly those of no knowledge of the Tyranid race, which, unless it happens to be a world manned by the experienced Astra Militarum, it's probably most of the worlds of the Imperium. Entire swarms of Tyranids growing beneath the very feet of an unknowing population. Then, as soon as the Hive Fleet deems the time right for invasion, the defenders find themselves facing attack from above and below. However, I'm not sure this unique divergence would land it in better stead than the others when it comes to facing off against the Adeptus Astartes, who you would expect are more familiar with each particular Hive Fleet traits, and thus surely would attempt to prevent any planetary infiltration before it even had the chance. They might not be successful, but they stand a better chance in my mind against Jormungandr than against some other minor Hive Fleets we're talking about today. Next we move on to Hive Fleet Ouroboros. Now Ouroboros is old school. If they had a playlist, they'd be rocking the greatest hits of the 80s. There's just no messing around with this Hive Fleet. They do what the Tyranids do best: teeth and claws. In particular, it's said to favour flying swarms in great number. They deploy them in such vast numbers that it completely overwhelms the skies. Thousands upon thousands of swarming flying death machines just descending upon their prey. Ouroboros is all about sheer overwhelming numbers. And well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, a particularly interesting note regarding this Hive Fleet is that it's actually believed to be one of the most ancient Hive Fleets yet seen. I'm not entirely sure how they managed to figure it out, but the Imperium believes the creatures of this Hive Fleet to be less refined and evolved than those of the other fleets so far seen. And not only is the thought of that pretty cool, that perhaps this is one of the oldest Tyranid fleets in existence, but it could also perhaps help to explain its more straightforward tactics. Ouroboros could well be one of the Tyranid fleets to first truly evolve the nature of the swarm. And that for me gives Ouroboros a pretty unique identity. As for if they could be the next big threat from the Tyranids, however, I don't think I'd put it amongst my top contenders. Unless there's some real surprises in store, I don't think there's anything that's going to take the Imperium by surprise. Now, if it simply manages to swell to major Hive Fleet status, well, it could simply just bludgeon its way all the way to the throne world. And lastly, we have Hive Fleet Tiamat. Now, Tiamat gets credit for probably being my favourite looking colour scheme. And when it comes to its unique adaptations, it's said to have evolved into a more defensive style of war, if such a thing could ever be said regarding the Tyranids. Tiamat is actually very different to its other known Hive Fleets, in the sense that it hasn't made an obvious rush towards the heart of the galaxy. This Hive Fleet has remained focused around the system which gave it its name, and it's surprisingly been there for a long time. And well, all this unexpected behaviour actually has the people who have bothered to investigate rather concerned, because no one actually knows why Tiamat is doing this. Tyranids are unknowable at the best of times, but when one Hive Fleet appears to be acting so completely different to all the others, it undoubtedly raises the question of why, and with that comes no small amount of fear. What's worse for the Imperium and the other races of the galaxy, however, is that rumours are beginning to arise of a strange bioconstruct within the Tiamat system, which is now emanating a strong psychic scream, which is only growing in power. What this actually is and what purpose it serves, well, we'll have to discuss this another day. However, Tiamat undoubtedly represents a possibly grave threat. Now, there actually has been several assaults sent against this Hive Fleet, but so far all have been obliterated. Their swarms adapted to have particularly tough armour, meaning that great resources have to be expended to take even the smallest of swarms down. Further news is arising that gene-stealer cults are devastating the systems around the territory of Tiamat, thus bringing great resources to feed the figurative beast. It's all a very compelling mystery, and one I definitely want to talk about some more one day. However, without actually knowing just what Tiamat's ultimate goal is, it does make it quite hard to rate on our debate today. However, that sums up all the known minor Hive Fleets. So who is the greatest threat? Which of any of them has the best possibility to rise to dominance, to become a truly galactic ending proposition? For me, I absolutely love this mystery of Tiamat, because it's so completely un-Tyranid-like, really showcasing a far more intellectual mindset than maybe any of the Imperium would like to admit. But again, until we know just what this psychic scream does, or at least have a bit more speculation about it, it does make it hard to state as the biggest threat. So for me, I am swayed towards Gorgon, Being able to develop a toxin that takes out the followers of Nurgle is no small feat. However, I'm going to lean towards Hydra. With Hydra, we have a Hive Fleet that's almost ghosting its way into the very heart of the Imperium, harvesting and growing in power as it goes, almost silently drifting through the shadows unnoticed. The Imperium could really not be paying enough attention until it is too late. And by then, it truly could be. Hydra, as we said, is learning as it goes, through the experiences of other former Hive Fleets. It's not even having to adapt to its own losses, which is a really terrifying prospect. By the time Hydra emerges in full force, the Imperium could well be facing the most advanced Hive Fleet yet, and one that adapts at seemingly impossible speed. Something even Guilliman could struggle to handle. But as always everyone, what do you think? Which of the known Tyranid fleets do you think could rise to be the next big threat? Do you agree with me that maybe it could be Hydra? Or do you feel it could be one of the others? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.